Have you ever looked at a painting and felt like it wasn't just showing you something, but it was screaming at you? Art isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it bleeds, and no two artists bled more honestly than Michael Vrubel and Edvard Munch. Two men who carried grief, madness, and loss into every brushstroke. Stick with me to discover how these two artists who never met each other lived surprisingly similar lives and made strangely alike art. Most of us know this famous painting called The Scream. The reason it's famous is not because it's Munch's best work, but because it was stolen. Yes, just like the Mona Lisa, and not once but twice, generating global headlines. We can't say that this is Munch's best work, but we definitely can say that it is one of those that accurately represents his painful existence and mental anguish. However, in order to really understand Edvard Munch's art, we need to understand his life. Edvard Munch was born in 1863. His mother died of tuberculosis when he was 5. As a result, his father fell into deep religious fanaticism and began telling his children scary stories about hell and the souls of sinners writhing on frying pans. Little 5-year-old Edvard fell into horror. He stopped sleeping and was haunted by nightmares. In order to somehow get rid of them, he began to draw. When Edvard was 14, his older sister, with whom he was very close, died. The time spent at the bedside of his dying sister and the pain of her loss were reflected not only in his paintings, but also throughout the artist's subsequent life. Michael Vrubel, who was born a little earlier than Munch and thousands of miles away, was on a similar life journey. He was seen as a rising star in Russian symbolism. His work always had an edge to it, a sense of torment. When Vrubel was 3 years old, his mother died. This loss affected him very strongly, despite the fact that his stepmother was loving and attentive. A series of graphic illustrations in Tolstoy's novel Anna Karenina, which he created as an adult, seemed to reflect a little boy waiting for his mother. Anna Karenina is depicted a little grotesquely, frantically hugging her little Serozha. This is what Vrubel lost in his childhood and longed to have once again. Munch and Vrubel both entered university to study professions completely unrelated to painting. Munch, at the insistence of his father, entered the engineering faculty. And Vrubel, also at the insistence of his father, entered the law faculty. Both did not complete their studies. Having turned to their art, neither Munch nor Vrubel were recognized by art critics and art historians. Almost all their paintings were rejected at exhibitions and ridiculed. In 1886, Edvard presented his beloved Sick Girl and received so many negative reviews. The following review appeared in one of the local newspapers. The best service that can be rendered to Edvard Munch is to pass by his paintings in silence. Munch's paintings have significantly lowered the level of the exhibition. The reason for this criticism was the apparent unfinished nature of his work and its shapelessness. The young artist was accused of an unwillingness to improve his technique and develop. Vrubel, who also went against the generally accepted trend in painting, was constantly penniless due to lack of orders. Michael Vrubel married a famous opera singer, and she became his muse. Her face can be recognized in many of his paintings, and this was one of the happiest periods in Vrubel's life. However, happiness began to slip away gradually when Vrubel started to recognize that he wasn't exactly mentally healthy. The illness worsened when he found out that his and his wife's child was born with a congenital defect, a cleft lip. This worsened his mental state. He became withdrawn, quick-tempered, and suffered from insomnia. But the misfortunes did not leave him. In 1903, his little son suddenly died. Michael managed to paint his portrait in a stroller, in which viewers are usually struck by the completely non-childish, somewhat tragic expression on the face of a 1-year-old child, and his completely adult look. The death of a child is probably one of the worst things that can happen to any person, and Vrubel was already mentally ill at the time. Therefore, a new exacerbation and accordingly a hospitalization were soon to come. In 1902, Vrubel painted his last demon, the demon defeated. He worked on this painting 17 hours a day, obsessed, binge drinking, and at the same time the artist's symptoms became more and more severe, and this was clearly seen on the canvas. The painting tormented the artist so much that even when it was hanging in the World of Art exhibition, Vrubel came to the hall every day with brushes and changed the face of the demon so that it became more and more creepy. Alexander Benoit wrote that his demon's pose, his build, had something tortured and twisted in them. In one letter, Vrubel even said, "I am not painting the demon, he is painting me." Eventually, Vrubel went blind, but even then, he was asking for brushes. Of course, one can argue that for an artist in general, playing with devilry is quite dangerous, no matter how they justify turning to such a theme. But in what concerns Vrubel, it is not difficult to notice that his demons seem to mark his milestones of plunging into madness. And the last demon appears to be an incoherent delirium of a mentally ill person. On the other hand, Munch's next moment of depression and illness came after the death of his father. He wrote in his diary, "You should no longer paint interiors, men reading and women knitting. They will be replaced by real people who breathe and feel, love and suffer." In memory of his father, Edward painted the painting Night in St. Cloud. In an apartment filled with night light, a man sits by the window. Modern art historians see in this image both Munch himself and his father, awaiting death. Munch once said, "Illness, madness, and death were the black angels that kept watching over my cradle." Munch's paintings were not decorative. They were diaries. In 1908, after years of anxiety, isolation, and alcoholism, Munch checked himself into a clinic. He was hearing voices, paranoid, shaking, and painting feverishly. Vrubel and Munch were not trying to start a movement. They weren't chasing fame. They were coping. Their art was a way to survive, to process loss, identity, fear. Expressionism, in simple words, is a style of painting in which the artist seeks to express their inner world of emotion rather than external reality. The art world shifted dramatically with the advent of Expressionism. Art became less about depicting reality while striving towards a perfect ideal, but rather about expressing the inner experiences of the artist himself. Perhaps the artist got tired of polished work that depicted non-existent ideals and wanted to show real life as it is, painful and full of suffering. Perfection and ideals are not relatable concepts, but suffering is. Interestingly, today, the world is moving towards that same hunger for authenticity. People don't want Photoshop magazine covers anymore. They want scars, stretch marks. They don't want the American dream anymore. They want simplicity. For years, we have been and continue to be surrounded by influencers and image filters, but we're looking for something real. Expressionism, born from the trauma of two suffering artists, gave us permission to feel and to express those feelings. And a century later, we're still learning to do that. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you learned something new. Please let me know in the comments below what you think of Expressionism, and if you have any other interesting artists that you'd like me to discuss on this channel. And I hope to see you in the next video.